Hi, everybody. I am Jim Acosta. I host a show now on Substack and YouTube, and I guess you can catch it on Apple Podcasts and a bunch of other places. But you might know me from some other stuff I did before that. But thanks, everybody, for coming tonight. And I want to just go down the panel here. First of all, let's do another round of applause if we can for the movie. That was and of course, everybody in the room here knows Congressman Swalwell. Eric Swalwell of California. But if we can go down the panel and give us the rest of the names here, and then we'll jump into the discussion.
Absolutely. I'm Mark Maxey. I produced the film.
Lon Haber, PR for the film and for Rolling Pictures.
All right, and we were just talking a few moments ago about this, and this was my first time seeing the film, and it really does just, it just comes across as an homage to the press, and it takes you inside this very dark world that Russia became in the early 2000s when they were waging this campaign in Chechnya and then attempting, very much so in a successful way, to suppress the truth in Russia as to what was going on in Chechnya. And what makes Anna so, I think, just fascinating as a character in this movie is just her dogged determination to pursue the truth, even if it meant sacrificing her life, and that's what we saw at the end of the movie. And Congressman Swalwell, you are a producer of this movie as well. How did you get involved in it, and what do you take away from the film?
A friend had sent me an early cut of the film, and it just so happened I was having dinner with Sean Penn the night I received it, and I thought, well, this subject matter is right in the wheelhouse of what Sean really cares about, which is, countering Russia's aggression, stopping what they're doing in Ukraine. And so Sean and I watched it in his living room. He asked me if the film team would be open to some notes. I said I think they'd probably take some notes from Sean Penn, and they did. Yeah. And to me, Anna and her story, yes, of course, reflect it's a monument to journalism and a free press, but it's also a cautionary tale. And today, we don't have enough Annas in the United States. And I hope this film inspires more people to not want to see us go the way of Russia, because there weren't enough Annas when Anna was Anna. And that's why there is no free press, essentially, in Russia today. But we haven't lost it just yet. And if there are more people like Anna, we won't lose it.
Yeah, and Congressman, one follow-up question to that, and that is, you clearly, as we're watching the film, at least I'll just say this from my perspective as the viewer, you see echoes in what's happening now. And what was taking place in the early to mid-2000s was just sort of this slow but steady sort of chipping away at independent journalism in Russia, intimidating whole news organizations. You can see, some of the dialogue and hear some of the dialogue in the film where people who work for the networks are saying, well, you kind of have to go along to get along. Those kinds of sentiments. Yeah. And it made me think, oh my goodness, some of this sounds familiar.
Yeah. And you had two things happening. You had Putin was gaslighting the American people, and Anna was one of the few who was willing to dig in and report on it. And as to the gaslighting, as we see today, and it's so Putin-like, what President Trump did last week with one of your colleagues, Terry Moran. He's sitting in the Oval Office, and he's insisting over and over that somebody that his administration admitted that they mistakenly sent to a death camp in El Salvador, that he had the letters MS and the numbers 13 on his wrist and on his knuckles. And it's so clearly photoshopped, but he is saying it with so much conviction, and that's what Putin did to the Russian people. And then on the other hand, you contrast that with Anna, where she's being told by her family and her editor and everyone around her that you're going to get hurt. She gets poisoned, and yet she persists. And that is so inspiring and not enough stock here in the United States.
And Mark, the film is brilliantly told, and you get to experience this not just through Anna's work in the press, but through her family. And Jason Isaacs plays a spouse who is worried that his wife is going to be murdered. You see her children going through this every day. You see the death threats that are coming into their home. That one scene where Jason Isaacs is writing down the death threats and says, we have to keep a record of this. I mean, you can just visualize this and see this happening in other places, to other people, to other journalists, and it does hit home.
That's one of the things that I really liked about this script and the way to tell Anna's story, because this could have been a very superficial look at a professional person with courage and integrity doing an amazing job. But there's so much more to who she was, and that included she was a wife, and she was a mother, and she was a friend, and an employee. And so this story hopefully showed a broader look at who she was as a person, which just makes everything else that she did all the more remarkable, I think, if you understand what was truly at stake for her, and yet she still had the courage to continue on. I think it's a story of courage more than anything to me, and I feel like that's something that hopefully more people have moving forward, because this isn't yesterday's news. She was killed almost 20 years ago in 2006, and yet these themes of Russian aggression and suppression of the truth and persecution of journalists and gaslighting the world are as current as this week's headlines, tragically.
And Lon, I mean, you've been in this business for a long time. There aren't many movies like this that are told with this kind of personal story. And I could hear the gasps in the audience when it said at the very end that she died. She was killed on Putin's birthday. I mean, it goes right to your heart. And we don't see stories like this told very often. That's what makes this film so special.
Yeah, exactly. And every film has its own life, so to speak, and in the PR sphere, in between the journalist and the story itself. But the way everything comes together, in words of war, thank you. There's something so empowering and so captivating about Anna and her dedication and focus to what she's doing that you really don't see in a lot of movies, not in this way.
And you could have made a documentary about Anna, and there have been documentaries about her, but a scripted feature film is able to dramatize not only the work that she did and what was going on in Russia, but also the relationship between two people where they're both journalists, and one has kind of reached the end of his career, so to speak, as she starts to rise. And you probably wouldn't be able to animate that in a docuseries or a documentary. It really would have to be in the scripted space. Yeah,
I mean, this is definitely a political thriller. And I mean, there aren't many moments where you're looking at your watch and saying, when is this going to? I mean, this moves, and it's a fast-paced thriller. But Congressman, again, getting back to what we were saying earlier about Russia, I mean, it feels very relevant to what we're seeing now on the world stage. The Ukrainians fighting for their lives right now, against a Russian threat that I mean, let's be honest here, has a new friend in the White House, it seems, to some extent.
Yes, and we have in our country somebody who aspires to rule the same way Putin does. But what we have right now is essentially four legs that our democracy sits upon. A Congress that can check an abusive president, a press that can report on an abusive president, a court that can rule and enforce against an abusive president, and a town square where people can fill and peacefully dissent against an abusive president. We've lost the first leg. There's no check on this president in Congress. But as long as the other three stand, and I would argue that the press is probably the wobbliest of those three when you look at those who have gone hat in hand to Mar-a-Lago, or at some networks at the very top of corporations telling journalists like you to not critically cover the president until a merger is agreed to. But if the press can hold and they can report on the court orders and whether the president follows them or not, and then the people can go to the town square to dissent against the president who would not follow a court order, those three legs can get us to a midterm election where you can have a free and fair election and have a check on the Congress. But if that leg collapses, then a court could have its order not followed, but no one would report on it in a critical way, and nobody would read about it to go to the town square. So that's why that leg of our democracy is so pivotal during these times.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you alluded to what we're seeing taking place right now with CBS, and I think you and I talked about this the other day. When 60 Minutes is in trouble, I think we're all in trouble as a country, and you can feel those echoes as you're watching this film, because you see these networks in Russia come under the same kind of pressure from the government. Hey, you know, which side are you on? And we can't just have that kind of situation in this country. I mean, one thing I did want to ask you about, Congressman, and I don't mean to hit you with something maybe you haven't picked up on just yet, but it just came out in the last 24 hours that apparently Carrie Lake, who is running the Voice of America, wants to use the OAN network for some of its programming, to use some of the content they put out for some of their programming. I mean, this is an organization that was very much peddling the big lie after the 2020 election, and now they're going to be, I guess, partly responsible for what comes out of the Voice of America. I mean, that doesn't sound good.
That's very on brand for an administration that punishes those they perceive as enemies, and in a very corrupt way rewards those who are on their team. And at the screening on Sunday, I was with Sean Penn and Jason Isaacs, and as we were coming out for the Q&A, everybody saw with horror on their devices that the president intends to impose a 100% tariff on any film that is shot overseas. And the fear immediately in the industry is that the intent of this is to bring corporations and studios and distributors to the table so that the president, as he's done with law firms and colleges and CEOs, that he can do one-off deals with them and say, okay, Comcast, I'm going to give you an exception or a carve-out, but I don't want SNL on anymore, or the same.
Or no more Trump skits.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And so the fear is that they, as they are with OAN, but they will use their power to, again, just suppress information and suppress dissent.
And I do want to tell, if anybody in the audience wants to ask a question, please, raise your hand. We're happy to field that question. And we'll get to you in just a moment, man. But Mark, I did want to ask you, because as I'm watching this film, and I don't have any kind of a window into this world, but what was it like, and maybe you can answer, maybe you can't, what was it like to get, I mean, these are some pretty notable actors who came together to put together this film. I mean, Jason Isaacs is having a moment right now.
He is.
He was in The White Lotus as the crazy dad with the Duke t-shirt on. And I mean, these are some pretty powerful actors in the industry. What was it like having this conversation with them? Like, hey, we want to make this film. It's very important. What do you think?
Yeah, at the time, in the moment, I'm not sure we realized how important or timely this film was. We started filming this in 2022, so we were in a different place. Certainly here as a country, the war in Ukraine had just started, and so we were certainly aware of Russia's presence. We were filming in Latvia, so we were just 50 miles over the border is Russia from where we were in Riga, because we wanted the film to feel very authentic. We wanted it to, this is really to preserve Anna's legacy and share her story. So we wanted to tell the story in the right way. And the casting was part of that as well. Maxine Peake is perhaps not as well known, but she will be, because she's brilliant in the role of Anna in this movie. Jason Isaacs, of course, is just an amazing actor. Kieran Hines is brilliant. But we have Ben Miles from The Crown, and throughout the cast, every single person.
Yeah, you're watching and say, I know that person. I know that person.
Right.
These are great actors.
So it's it was great having such an amazing group of people come together, and it's not just the people you see on the camera. Our director of photography, our production designer, Crispian, is genius. I mean, the world that he created.
The editing is really sharp.
Throughout, it was really just an incredible team of people that came together to tell this story, and I'm so proud of the work that they've done, and hopefully the legacy that will be remembered.
There's a fearlessness in what Mark and his team did as well, because it is well known in Hollywood that studios will pass on scripts that could get close to power. and they didn't flinch when it came to making this movie. And again, knowing the same risks that Anna took, that you could face, a backlash or threats, they made this film.
Yeah.
And that's important.
And the best thing that everybody can do tonight is go home, talk to your friends, talk to your relatives, tell them to go see this movie, because as this movie becomes successful, I think it'll get a conversation going. I think there are some folks here who want to ask some questions. Yes, ma'am. There are microphones. Should we, do you mind, is it better, Bill, if they go to the microphone, or should we bring it to them?
Either way.
I hate to do that to you.
Over here.
There's a young man in the audience I know who could maybe do this for us. My producer, Matt, brought his son.
Yes, thank you for bringing such an excellent film to us. I did not know who she was until tonight. So you're preaching to the choir here. What are your plans to bring this to the mainstream audience of America so that they see what we see?
That's a great question. I mean, the film is in theaters now on somewhat a limited basis. We opened in New York and Los Angeles last week. We're expanding to another 50 cities across the country tomorrow and for the next week or two. There'll be a theatrical release in the UK this summer and then elsewhere throughout the world. There will be a streaming release as well. We've partnered with Neon and Bleecker Street to find independent film distributors, have a joint venture called Decal, who's bringing this through their relationships with Apple and with Amazon. So it'll be streaming this next month, mid-next month as well. The streaming window opens up. But our hope is that people do come out and see this. This isn't just entertainment. I've made other films that fall into the entertainment category, where it's a good date night movie or what have you. But this almost feels more like an impact campaign. We hope that people that see the movie have a better appreciation for the dangers that journalists face in the 21st century and the courage it takes to really speak truth to power the way that they have to, despite the fear of death or reprisal for doing so. So we're hoping that the film sparks conversations and raises awareness. When the free press is attacked, an attack on the free press is an attack on all of our freedoms. There's a better way to say that, but it is so true. By shutting down the press, it's the way to ensure that we don't know what happens next because there's no one there to tell us.
Yeah. Walter Cronkite used to say, a free press is not essential to democracy, it is democracy. This movie is very much in that vein.
Yeah. And if I can add it, just last week while we were showing this film to audiences in New York, I'm reading the news and the body of a Ukrainian journalist was returned by Russia with her brain and her eyes and her larynx ripped out. And if that's not a message, don't think, don't see, don't speak, to journalists, that's just chilling. That this is the world we live in today, and yeah.
The Putin playbook. Anybody else with a question out there? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for the film. It's really very interesting and very powerful to watch. My name is Uliana, and I'm a Ukrainian reporter here in DC. I'm doing freelance for Ukrainian media. And actually, I have two questions. First question, we all have awareness about freedom of speech here in DC after VOA situation and so on, so on. And my question is to Congressman, because you have a power and you can do something. What action can you do? That's the first question. Yeah. And the second question, the story is about back to 2005. So now we have like 20 years more, the same situation in Russia. And still, we have some beliefs here in DC, even in some liberalism in Russia. Yeah, maybe in some people who can opposite to government, but it's not possible actually in Russia. And I would like your thoughts on that. What kind of liberalism is possible in Russia? Thank you so much.
Yeah. We're not helpless at all. The Congress authorized and the president signed into law aid to Ukraine. And it's really on all of us, but especially my colleagues on the inside, to hold colleagues accountable who we serve with to make sure that this administration distributes that aid and that we keep our promise to the Ukrainians and we don't leave our friends in the fields. What I am doing personally is I'm doing 2 town halls a month in Republican districts where they will not hold town halls. And I can tell you from Tampa to the St. Louis suburbs, to Boise, Idaho, to Sacramento, where I was 2 weeks ago, that people are 700 to 1,000 people in each of those cities that I've attended. And top issue, especially from our veterans, is keeping our promise on Ukraine. So what we need to do is show the fight on the inside. And the Republicans only have a 3-vote majority in the House, a 4-vote majority in the Senate. So you can apply pressure and hopefully see that it works and it gets the right outcome. But on the outside, applying that pressure at the town halls tells those members of Congress that there's a reckoning that's coming in the midterms. And so if you don't keep the promise that we made now, we will put into office those who will.
All right. Anybody else? In the back.
Can you repeat that part? Sorry.
I think you meant the
What can be done
liberalism in
inside?
Russia to foster, a more progressive movement in Russia, more liberal movement in Russia.
Yeah, to me, that the Russian people. Yeah.
I mean, right now, the situation in Russia is very dire in terms of information getting into that country. I mean, I remember from covering the war on the anchor desk at my old place that, we had correspondents who would go in there, and it's just extremely difficult to get in there, do your job as a journalist, and get out safely. And I mean, the entire country right now is basically under a curtain of state media. And I mean, one of the things that we have to guard against in this country, and we saw this just recently when Trump had Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office, there was an attempt made very briefly to have the TASS news media brought into the Oval Office to represent the Russian press while Zelensky was in the room. I mean, this occurred even as Trump was banishing the AP at that point from the Oval Office in Air Force One. And so, I mean, the last thing we want to do is import Russian state media tactics into the United States. But I mean, I can just tell you from my personal experience covering the war in Ukraine and dealing with correspondents moving in and out of Russia, it is extremely difficult to get in there, report the truth, and get it out. It does happen on occasion, but it is very, very difficult. I've also reported in places like Cuba, Vietnam, and so on. I mean, in China, and you're just dealing with a very different situation in those types of countries. Yeah, you bet. In the back. In the back, yes.
Thanks very much, and thank you for an excellent movie. Congressman, could you just go back to the point you made about the things that need to hold here? And when you look at the media, what do you hope that looks like, and what do you fear that looks like?
Well, the happy ending so far with 60 Minutes is they doubled down on Sunday night, and despite orders to not critically cover the Trump administration until the merger was completed, they had a piece on the shakedown that the Trump administration is doing of the law firms, and the public is widely supporting that. And so to me, it means that we have to support journalists who are willing to do that, but also that my colleagues and I need to empower more journalists in more places, because as traditional vertical journalism is being scrambled or too influenced by those who sit in the C-suite, we need to support people like Jim who have gone to Substack. And oftentimes what we found is people who have done that have larger audiences than the average programming at CNN or MSNBC. Which is, we don't want to ignore them, but I've encouraged my colleagues, to go, to other places and spaces. For example, at the State of the Union this year, for the first time ever, we had an influencer space 1 floor below where the president delivered his State of the Union, and we brought in about 50 different influencer journalists who had a wide array of followers so that we could communicate to them and not just rely on traditional vertical media.
All right, anybody else? I think I saw a couple of other hands. We haven't really gone to this side of the room, but we can try to go to this side. This nice lady right here, she was being patient.
Thank you all very much again. It's a really powerful film. I've now had the pleasure of seeing it here twice, because I saw it a year ago when it first screened here at the National Press Club, so I'm very happy to have it back. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how the film has changed, other than the title. It was called Anna at the time. And what other changes have been made in the film since then. And also, getting back to the very good question about distribution, do you have any ideas for how to get this into perhaps in front of eyes that are not the choir, so to speak?
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. So in terms of what's different, so we showed kind of a work in progress, a rough cut of the film a year ago. Congressman Swalwell was with us, as was Sean Penn and John Brennan for the conversation that evening. This is largely the same film, the same story, different title. There's some things that have been tightened and a few things that have been changed just to make it flow and feel a little more compact. So maybe what you saw a year ago was maybe a little bit longer than this version, but it's largely the same story told in the same way. And in terms of how to reach people, hopefully this is part of that. I'm hoping that people talk about it, because really it's that grassroots effort that really is going to let people find out about the film and then go find a place to find it. We can run commercials on TV, and we can run posts on the internet. But Jim's been a huge. We really appreciate the attention he's given by interviewing Sean Penn or Jason Isaacs or Congressman Swalwell. It's voices like that really help kind of champion this issue and the themes of our film. And so we're hoping that more people hear about it and find out about it and have a chance to go see it, because we do want this to have an impact. Part of our commitment to that is, we want Anna's story to continue helping the next generation of journalists. So a portion of the proceeds of the film are being donated here to the National Press Club's Press Freedom Center and to the Committee to Protect Journalists, because we want her story and this film to help support and sustain the work that they're doing on behalf of a free press and on behalf of journalists around the world. We just feel that's so important to our future. So.
And
Go ahead.
if I may tack on to that, since from the time you've seen the film until now, it's taken on a whole other life of its own. And part of getting back to also another question is how to get the film distributed. So the film is now, it was here, it got distributed throughout the United States, now it's moving so it's moving all over the world now. And so there's more than two parts to it, but being able to, Russia still buys films. They buy all kinds of films all of the time, and you don't hear about it because you don't know really what's going on. But in order to get more international audiences and people in countries closer to, geographically and otherwise, is another way to spread the message, and through communications, through the arts.
They haven't bought this film, just for the record.
Not yet.
I've not had a call yet from the Kremlin.
But everybody around, around the area. And also, when in doing press outreach, it's making sure that, people are, everybody here and people in the film, they're talking with all different news outlets all over the world, whether it's an MSNBC, whether it's a Fox, whether it's The Hill, whatever side of whatever you want to.
And the other thing, I point out too is, it's important for the choir, all of the choir, to hear this kind of stuff, because, each and every one of you are in contact with friends or relatives and people who, oh gosh, I'm having some buyer's remorse right now. I thought I was voting for this, and now you need to have conversations about, this is the kind of movie you need to have a conversation about. And not everybody knows about this. So I get the whole idea of, we need to get in front of everybody and And maybe it could air on Fox, Newsmax, and I mean, we can't get ahead of ourselves here. Just to get it out to everybody who was in the world of reality, that would be good too.
Yeah.
So, and I do understand it is expanding into the DC market this weekend. You should be able to see it in the DC area. So if you talk to somebody and they say, hey, I want to see this, you can tell them. So.
Yeah, you can go to wordsofwarmovie.com and find a list of all the screenings locally here, and AMC is showing it in Alexandria. But we've had requests from theaters in places like Iowa or Texas that were not on my list of our target demographic, and yet they've heard about it, and they've come to us and said, we'd like to share this story with our audiences, which gives me hope, the fact that there is that kind of outreach and awareness growing about this story, because it's such an important issue for everybody, not just the people in the coasts.
All right. How about we take one more? Who's left? Who's in the back, maybe? Somebody in the back hasn't had a chance? Who's been holding their hand up the longest? We'll go there.
Some of this movie was filmed overseas, I understand. Yeah. What is it going to mean for movies like this if movies are subject to a 100% tariff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 100% of this movie was filmed overseas. We filmed it entirely in Latvia, and then our post-production was entirely in London. So it was a very international production, with my company, Rolling Pictures, being the American component of this whole thing, but largely a European effort. I'm not sure how realistic this tariff is. Films are not a good that could be taxed at the border like my tennis shoes are. If you're streaming this over Netflix and the film's being distributed over the ether, there's not really a point of entry where a tax could be assessed. So I think it's more hyperbole or pomp or whatever the goal is, disruption. I'm not sure there's a very thoughtful plan on how to implement what's been proposed. But, hey, if John Voight can save Hollywood, I'm all for it. So.
Also, there's a number of reasons why you would film anything, TV or a feature overseas. I mean, sometimes the subject matter, as Mark pointed out here, it's just more authentic to do it in the neighborhood of Russia, like on its border. Sometimes it pencils out more, where for an independent film, to tell this story, it's harder, to get buy-in from studios in the United States or traditional investors in the United States. The credits overseas are much more competitive than what we see in the United States. To that, I say, if you want more films and TV made in the United States, let's work together to have a better credit. A better credit in California, as a Californian, but also federally, to make it easier to tell stories like this, when the subject matter warrants it in the United States.
And I will note, I mean, Trump put out that post where he's dressed up with a lightsaber and everything, and this was on May the 4th. And I mean, he should know that, like, Star Wars was filmed in Tunisia. I mean, so I don't know.
And Mark Hamill is not a very big fan of his.
Mark Hamill's not a big fan of his, and he had the red lightsaber, which meant he was a Sith.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm kind of a nerd, so I know this, but there's a lot of inconsistencies there. I don't know if they ever checked this stuff out ahead of time before they.
I think they got the color of the lightsaber correct, actually.
I think so. I think you might be right about that. All right, should we wrap it up there, or is somebody desperate to ask one last question where it'll make me regret taking one more question? Whenever I do these and I say, I'll take one more, and then it's like, I shouldn't have done that.
Hi, thanks so much for showing this film. It was amazing. So for those of us that covered the war in Chechnya, I was a journalist in Russia during both wars, and, I think what comes to us is that we know what's happening in Ukraine is exactly the same thing that we saw in Chechnya. And we know exactly that same brutality that everybody saw happening in Chechnya is happening right now in Ukraine, and has been happening since day one. And we're not able to really see it or understand it, because back in those days, there was a whole foreign press. There was also a very robust Russian press it was just the end of the fall of the Soviet Union, and there was so much hope. There were so many incredible journalists. And those journalists, Russian and otherwise, we all went down to Chechnya and we covered what was going on there. And that is not happening with Ukraine. So you don't have any Russian journalists that are able to cover that at all. So just like thinking about that vacuum that there is no journalism, real journalism happening from the Russian side, and this is the country that's waging that war. And then on top of it, the foreign press corps that used to be in Russia that would have gone to that war that Russia was engaged with doesn't exist anymore. So I just, it's worrisome because I personally see the deficit in the coverage in Ukraine. And just having been there, it's like every time I think of the war, I know exactly what they're doing. Every single thing that they did in Chechnya, they are doing now, right now in this moment.
Yeah, Congressman, some final thoughts on that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I would say, well, thank you for
For what you do.
bravely covering what you have covered, and yes, ending where we began. It is a cautionary tale for where we are in the United States, because you just pointed that out, that 20 years ago you still had Russian journalists who would go to the battlefield, and you had foreign journalists who would cover it and then distribute that within Russia. And as Jim said, that's not happening today. And that can be us, that can be our future, and in a not so distant future, if our press is not able to freely report. So to me, as someone who at age 10 delivered newspapers, and my grandfather was the editor of our local newspaper, and I wrote for my school newspaper from 5th grade through college, and today am critically covered by the press, and understand that's the bargain with living in a free country. We have to all individually, be guardians of that, because it's much easier to keep a democracy than to get one back that you've lost.
Right. Imagine living in a country where, we're told that all of these migrants who are being scooped up right now are all murderers and criminals, when we know that that is not the case. Right. When a 4-year-old U.S. citizen is scooped up and sent back to his country of origin, and when you have the President of the United States continuing to refer to the press in this country as the enemy of the people, imagine a situation in this country where you don't have a press that can push back on that sort of thing, where free speech is stifled to the point where people have to accept those lies as the truth. Those are the stakes, and I think it's animated quite well in this film. Guys, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Lon, Mark, and Congressman Swalwell, thank you. Thank you for that last question. Really appreciate it. Yeah, thanks a lot. Well done. Thanks a lot. Well done.